Hello, I'm excited to bring you to another episode of Diagnostic Guru. We are speaking with Courtney Tate. Courtney is a fellow diagnostic laboratory industry leader, a geneticist, a translational commercial leader, starting her career at Myriad Genetics, one of the first true biotech industry leaders in genetic testing. You may have heard of them as the company more famously known for their patent legal battle and trying to own the IP around the first discovered genes associated with breast cancer, BRCA. Courtney was a pioneer in the early days of the genetics biotech industry, a time known as the Wild West of genetics and genomics. Courtney received her Executive MBA from UNC Chapel Hill, a first as a genetic counselor, combining the importance of genomic science with business. Courtney is a commercial genetic translational scientist, sometimes known as the Olivia Pope, in simplifying complex situations while developing immediate solutions in genetics. I'm excited to speak with Courtney today. We will dig deeper into her unconventional journey, dissect how she got here, the hurdles she faced along the way, and hear what she has planned next in her career. Courtney, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
I love your background. I love all the books. Those look like
Thanks.
some awesome books that you have there. You'll have to recommend some. Is that a scale? That's like
It is. I know it is. It was found, we shall say, when we were doing a relocation of the laboratory. So they're with the
Ah,
discarded pile. I was like, that'd be kind of cool to have on a bookcase behind somebody that works in the diagnostic laboratory space.
yeah, I love it. I can't remember the last time I've used one of those. Probably undergrad biology or chemistry lab.
Exactly.
Oh, that's classic. Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we? I really would love to hear and share with the audience what made you get into genetics as your specific science field in the first place.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. I grew up in a relatively small town in Alabama. I'm the oldest of four, and I'm
Oh,
actually 12 years older than my youngest sibling. So I remember when my mother was pregnant with my youngest brother that they had to go to this doctor's appointment in the big city of Birmingham. And I remember, right, I'm in middle school, I'm big enough to understand, and I was just, fascinated by why do you have to travel 3 hours to go to a doctor's appointment? Of course, I didn't know then, but I know now she was advanced maternal age. And there was just a limited amount of genetic counselors in the state of Alabama, so they had to travel. So I think that was my first thought of wanting to bring this type of medicine closer to the patients. And then, as years progressed, I also had ideas around working in a laboratory. So I thought maybe I'll be part of a team that will discover a cure for sickle cell. I must admit, I spent a summer interning in a laboratory, and I did learn that I didn't have exactly the patience to wait on science experiments to work. Going back into, I guess that was my junior year of college, still had that love of genetics, wanted to be able to interact more with people, and discovered the field of genetic counseling, and the rest is history.
I love that. Can you explain a little bit further? Why did you pick sickle cell as your primary disease of interest?
I think because obviously, as a member of the African American community, and that's a common genetic condition that affects individuals of African American descent, and also having heard my mom discuss that, right? So discussing whether she had the traits, whether myself or any of my siblings. So that was an early kind of introduction to the concept of genetics and Mendelian inheritance to me. So I think because of that early introduction and the prevalence in my own community, that was an interest. And I did still do a thesis project on sickle cell. It wasn't in the laboratory. It was based more around focus groups and looking at opportunities to increase education and awareness within the African American community. So I did carry that forward, even though I never worked specifically in a lab seeking the cure.
That's incredible. And that shows you that you are a pioneer because that is one of the key genes and disease risks that are run right and standard carrier screening to date for anyone who is pregnant or thinking of having a child. And what fascinates me most about that disease condition is that it's literally a single variant on
Right.
one gene, where the gene has other multiple variances or mutations that are associated with beta thal. So it's like how is it that one single variant can drive one condition is incredible.
Yeah, the fascinating things about genetics, right?
Yes, that's probably why I fell into it as well. All right. Well, I think what's really interesting though is that even though your foundation is a genetic counselor and a geneticist and really speaking with patients, you were able to pivot in your career, which I think is really hard to do. And I would love to dig in on that a little bit further. Specifically, how did you cross the line, as I like to say, from science to the commercial side and prompted you to make the shift into marketing?
So, as a graduate student, I did find myself observing other genetic counselors who were either had second jobs or had roommates and was baffled. And as you can imagine, once you're out of graduate school and with your own first job, you begin to quickly realize why that is. And so there was an opportunity as Myriad Genetics was expanding into the market. They were looking for salespeople. And the commercial leader at the time had a philosophy of he could teach people with the right personality how to sell more easily than he could teach people genetics. So there was an opportunity presented by a recruiter to join as a salesperson, which I had never thought about. But it also, gave an opportunity to go back to where we started with being able to take genetics to a broader space. So in the clinic, right, I was reliant on patients being referred to me. I was seeing them one-on-one. And I really did see this opportunity to join Myriad and then be able to go out into clinics and had a 3-state territory and be able to increase access to genetic testing. So that was kind of how I made the leap.
It's really interesting for me to hear that as somebody who's been in the field as long as you, is how that journey began, because the majority of medical science liaisons that support the commercial team are individuals with your background, because clinicians, right, want to talk to people who understand the science and the clinical implications behind it. So you're really probably one of the first, you're on the frontier of developing that process and that system in our clinical genetic community. That's
Yeah, and
amazing.
I would say, funny story is when I did call my program director to tell her that I would be leaving clinical to join a, like you said, the wild side. It was an interesting conversation. We are great friends now, but it was like, what do you mean? You've invested this time, this money, you have this skill as a clinician, and you're going to go sell? But I would say it's turned out pretty well for me.
No, that's why I love the translational piece, right? That's what's really important to highlight here for our audiences, that you have the foundational knowledge, but you can translate it into an everyday language so everybody can understand and learn.
Yes.
Well, how about we touch upon some of your experiences where you've held several leadership roles
Mhm.
throughout your career. And I kind of want to talk about the good and the bad, so to speak, and like what was your most challenging moments as a female leader, and what was some of the most rewarding?
Yeah, I would say most challenging would be what your audience may expect, right? There's oftentimes when I'm the only, so either the only female in a room, oftentimes the only person of color in a room. So then you combine those as being the only female person of color in a room. And I think that can be both lonely at times, but I think it also presents challenges for women in terms of just being heard. So those moments when you feel like you've made a comment, a suggestion, a recommendation, it kind of lands with no response, and then a colleague may say something very similar, and suddenly there's a response. So it's just that moment of was it me? Or so I think that has been a challenge, and just continuing, and it's continuing evolution now of just finding voice, using voice, how to be heard. I think those are probably some of the most challenging moments as a female leader. But on the flip side, from the rewarding standpoint, I would say being able to be a role model. I get notes from individuals within organizations that I may or may not have personally met, but they'll say, I saw your email, or I was on a call and you were there. And it is refreshing. There are women in those conversations, in those rooms. So I think that, and then being able to have the opportunity to coach and develop. So I often tell individuals, females on my team, that we spend, outside of our waking hours, we spend the most hours at work. And so work should be fulfilling, but it also should be, if this isn't the place for you forever, that's okay. Like my job as a leader and a manager is for you to get what you need to get out of this opportunity so that you are ready to make the next step for yourself.
Oh, that's so great. There's two key points that just resonated with me personally. Is one is the somebody else's statement actually gave the people in the room the confidence that what you were saying is true. In my early years, I used to get so frustrated with that, and now I'm just like, see, it just tells you that I know what I'm talking about. So you
Right.
should have listened to me in the first place. And I just think the rewarding part too is really important to reflect on and kind of hold that true, right, to yourself as we age in this environment. Some things change and some don't, right?
Right.
Um, all right. Well, with all of that, what advice would you give to women who are pursuing leadership roles today in science? Because as we said, some things have changed, but some things still hold true. So, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, I would say, obviously knowing the science is key because in order to be heard, you have to know your stuff. So, I still am a huge proponent of having the science background, knowing the science, being confident. But if you want to make that pivot onto more of the business side, you have to also know the business. And so for some people, that may be pursuing an MBA, but it doesn't have to be. It can be things in your current role and position. So asking more questions, asking about the budget, asking to be present at various meetings. Because what you're going to want to do is to be able to show that you can know the science, but you can also know the business and know how the science contributes to the development of the business, the contribution to the business, and things of that nature.
That's fantastic advice. That's definitely what I've, encountered as well, in my career, in a sense that I wish I learned it in graduate school, the business side, instead of learning it on the fly. But at the end of the day, it's the business is what drives the decisions, right?
Yes.
Um, so knowing that and learning that is really key. And thank you for telling me you don't necessarily have to go back and get an
Yeah.
MBA.
It's not
Not
for
an easy
everybody.
feat. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's not an easy feat for sure. Um, well, looking back, more on your career from today, is there any situation you wish you had handled differently? And if you could go back and tell yourself in that moment, what would you change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it dovetails on a little bit of what we've been chatting about, and I would just describe it as finding your voice and using your voice. So as I reflect back, there have been times when I've been in situations where things have been presented to me and I may have had questions, but they were presented from the vantage point of the other side had already thought through the whole situation before they show up. But when it's presented to me, it's new. And I admit I've been a bit of a deer in headlights.
Hmm.
And I think as I reflect on some of those situations, is that then silence becomes interpreted as agreement. And once that happens, the ball is rolling, right? There's no easy way to undo. So as I was thinking about it, it was just finding your voice and using your voice. And I think I have gotten better at thinking more quickly, using silence more strategically. So it may be silence, but it's silence while both parties sit there together versus silence and exit the room, so that there is that opportunity to process and respond. Because I do think otherwise you may end up, making agreements in situations that may not be the best fit for you, but it's kind of hard to unwind afterwards.
No, it's so true. There's so many times where I get lost in my head. And then I'll leave the meeting. I'm like, oh, why didn't I say that?
Yes.
So I hope everyone who's listening find your voice.
Yeah,
It seems to be the key of our conversation today.
I think so.
That's wonderful. Um, well, taken from that, because this is sort of the theme of this podcast is, not everything is, roses and easy roads. So, let's really, if you could kind of highlight, which we kind of have already, but if there's any other examples you'd like to present to the group, what's your one good, your one bad, and your one ugly from your career to date?
Um, I'll start with the good. So I would say it might sound cliche, but it's the people. Like I've met amazing people all along my journey. And even when there may be professional disagreements, there may be different viewpoints, we are responsible for different segments of the business, just the people that I've met. So I've got friends and colleagues from that first sales job that we were mentioning, folks from that first clinical job straight out of grad school that I still see at various conferences, follow them on social media, and we're still able to have conversations. So I would say the people. As far as, let's see, the ugly, I'm going to take us back to COVID-19. So that was a very interesting time for diagnostic laboratories. And the one that I worked at, like many, we had to make a pivot. So we, almost overnight, there was no longer a need for pap smears, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and trich because people weren't going to well-woman visits. And people also weren't doing elective surgeries, but there was a significant need for COVID testing. So we made that transition, and I became lead for our strategic house accounts. So that would be for public health departments, universities, colleges, employers. And I would say the ugly was in the managing of swabs. So I'm sure for your audience, we all remember specimen collection devices. Finding them during that time was a crazy time. So I think of that in terms of there was limited supply, having to look at forecasts of what was needed to be able to serve the patients in the communities. What did we have? Allocating that, making decisions of what clinics are going to get how many, and then having to be prepared when they don't get what they're expecting, and then having to manage that against fingers crossed that suppliers and logistics suppliers will be able to deliver the next specimen or the next shipments as expected. So I would say that was a pretty tough time, pretty tough.
I can imagine. How many hours were you putting in on a daily basis?
I was probably clocking about 18 hours for a while there, and definitely have memories of, very early mornings, working during the day, doing things with the family in that, kind of evening hours, and then being back at a desk and looking at spreadsheets and figuring out swab allocations because folks that work in warehouses get to work very early the next morning and just having to have all that teed up. So definitely a challenging time for all of us that were in the diagnostic laboratory industry.
I'm sure that's the last thing you thought of as a young girl thinking about being a geneticist and studying sickle cell disease, that you would be trying to figure out where there's swabs so people can get tested. I think that shows people it rounds you out, right? Like just because you have that foundational clinical scientific background, there's other things that you can do with your degree that you can apply. Like you're really good at establishing hypotheses, right? And answering questions and bringing solutions. Like we said, you're the Olivia Pope in your world of coming up with complex situations. So that's a great example of how your foundational training really made you be successful in what you do today.
Yeah, thanks. I agree.
Where do you see yourself today, and what's the future for Courtney and where she wants to go?
Yeah, I would say I still have a passion for patients and patient care. Obviously, genetics is at my core. I'm a genetic counselor through and through. I think as we journey through our careers, as you mentioned, we ebb and flow. And so I think as I have also had the opportunity to work with some labs and with some products that had amazing potential but didn't make it. I find myself thinking about the areas such as health equity and health disparities. So as I think about what's next, would love to be part of, fulfilling passion and purpose around things that are addressing those questions, especially for communities that don't have access, which I think does kind of tie us back to where we started this conversation, which is when I was like, why are we leaving small town Alabama to drive 3 hours to go for a genetics? So I think that, we have this point in our career where things start to come full circle. And so I think that's where I find myself.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, here we still have rural areas that don't have access to testing. I mean, myself, I'm in New York City. I have I don't know how many hospitals in my back door. Still takes me forever to get a doctor's appointment.
That's true. Yeah,
But that's why I think the big at-home testing space, direct access testing, those types of areas have become big in our field and industry. And like you said in the beginning, you want a job that you wake up every day and you feel proud of, right? Because that's where you spend most of your time is at work
yeah,
than you do in your
exactly.
in your personal life. Well, we're coming here to an end. So, I always like to close my interviews and ask a final question to all of our diagnostic gurus out there, especially yours, Courtney. What is your superpower?
Oh, wow. Interesting you asked that. I was actually just at a workshop about a month ago, and they closed with a similar question. And you can't see it, but we did an exercise to kind of get to that, and actually have a post-it note on my laptop with my answer. So I'm going to go with my superpower is translating complex to simple, and I literally wrote it down. So I think that's it. I think that as we went through an exercise around, ironically, that same question and thinking about what it is that I bring to meeting rooms or tables or conversations based on my background in genetic counseling, and I think the counseling part of that is important, plus business, is just the ability to translate complex to simple and being able to adjust the conversation and the messaging to meet the audience. So that's what I'm going to go with today, translating complex to simple.
I love that. And I love that you already went through this experience. It's very synergistic. So, all right. Well, if anyone needs someone who can translate complex to simple, I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you, Courtney.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It really was a joy to learn more about you, where you've been and where you're going. And I can't wait to get your story out there to share with others so you can inspire young women leaders who are just getting into science and showing them the possibility. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.